There's a quiet moment in life, often in the middle of our busiest days, where we pause and wonder, am I actually moving towards something or just moving? That single thought has changed more lives than any failure or setback ever has, because the truth is simple. Most people aren't lost because they lack talent. They're lost because they lack clarity. And clarity is not found by accident. It is found by asking the right questions. Today, I want to share 3 questions that can completely recalibrate your path. 3 questions that, if you stay until the very end, will not only give you direction, but also give you purpose. These are the questions that divide a life lived on autopilot from a life lived with intention. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about the next chapter of your life, this speech is for you. And I promise you, by the final question, something inside you will shift. We live in a world full of noise, a world that constantly demands our attention, our energy, our reactions. From the moment we wake up, we're surrounded by opinions about who we should be, expectations about what we should achieve, and pressure to keep up with a pace that was never designed for human peace. And somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, something quietly fades, not because it isn't important, but because it's overwhelmed. That something is our own voice. There's a strange irony in life. The more we let the world tell us what matters, the further we drift from what truly matters to us. And maybe that's why so many people feel restless. Even when everything looks fine on the outside, they have jobs, families, responsibilities, and routines, but they also have that silent discomfort inside them. A whisper that says, this isn't it, not like this. But we ignore it because ignoring feels easier than questioning. Yet the truth is, clarity never arrives from comfort, it arrives from courage. And that is why the question, what truly matters to me, is both powerful and uncomfortable. Because to answer it honestly, you have to strip away everything the world told you to care about. You have to turn down the volume of the noise so you can hear the truth of your own heartbeat. You have to be willing to see yourself without the filters of society, without the expectations of family, without the pressure of comparison. You have to look inward, and this time without flinching. When you ask, what truly matters to me, you're not just searching for preferences. You are searching for the foundation of your life. This question pushes you to confront the core of your identity, your values, your fears, your desires, your scars, and your dreams. It challenges you to ask, what would I fight to protect even when it's difficult? What brings peace to my soul? Not excitement, not distraction, not temporary happiness, but peace. What do I value even when there is no reward, no applause, and no one watching? These questions are not small. They are not light. They are not simple. They demand honesty, and honesty demands bravery. Most people avoid asking them because they're afraid of what they might discover. What if what matters to me is different from what my family wants? What if it conflicts with the life I've already built? What if it asks me to make a change I don't feel ready for? What if the answer is inconvenient? But the greater danger is never asking. The greater danger is living an entire life, years, even decades, chasing things that don't belong to your purpose. Many people spend their whole lives climbing a ladder only to realize it's been leaning against the wrong wall. And the only thing more painful than falling is realizing you've spent everything, your time, your energy, your dreams on a life that wasn't truly yours. Purpose doesn't begin with ambition. It begins with honesty. The kind of honesty that is raw and unfiltered. The kind of honesty that doesn't care how things look, only how things feel. The kind of honesty that isn't afraid to say, I want something different, or this no longer fits who I am becoming, or I deserve a life that aligns with my heart. And once you get honest, truly honest, something powerful happens. You stop chasing everything and you start choosing the right things. There's a moment in everyone's life where they realize that chasing everything is the fastest route to exhaustion. You can impress people and still feel empty. You can accomplish goals and still feel lost. You can check every box and still feel like something is missing. That's because the goal was never to have everything. The goal was to have what matters. When you understand what matters, you align your energy with intention instead of impulse. You make decisions that reflect your values rather than your fears. You begin to measure your life based on meaning, not achievement. You stop saying yes to things that drain you. You stop apologizing for wanting something different. You stop living on autopilot. You start tapping into a deeper clarity that makes your choices feel lighter, your direction feel clearer, and your future feel more aligned. People often think that clarity comes from knowing more. But clarity actually comes from needing less. It comes from subtracting the expectations that never belong to you. It comes from letting go of beliefs that were handed to you, not chosen by you. It comes from realizing that the world is loud, but your inner truth is quiet, and the quiet is where the answers are. When you ask, what truly matters to me, you begin to identify the few things worth building your life around. Maybe it's your family, maybe it's your integrity, maybe it's your creativity, maybe it's service to others, maybe it's peace, stability, freedom, growth, or contribution. It doesn't matter what the answer is as long as it's yours. And once you discover what matters, you begin to see the world differently. Things that used to feel urgent lose their power. Things that used to seem important become irrelevant. You stop running in circles. You stop rushing without direction. You start moving with purpose. And with purpose comes a sense of calm that the world cannot shake. You learn to protect your energy. You learn to say no with confidence. You learn to say yes with intention. You learn to build a life that feels aligned, not forced. You learn that clarity isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing which questions guide your path. In the end, what truly matters is not what the world expects from you. It's what your soul quietly whispers when everything else goes silent. And the moment you choose to listen, everything begins to change. When you ask yourself the question, what impact do I want to create? You step into a different dimension of life. Suddenly, you are not just thinking about what you do, but why it matters. Not what you achieve, but what remains after the achievement fades. Not what people see, but what people feel because of you. This question invites you to rise above the surface of your existence and examine the imprint you leave behind on people, on communities, on the world, and even on yourself. Most of us grow up being told what career to chase, what job is respectable, what lifestyle is desirable. We are taught to measure our progress in promotions, positions, and paychecks. But the truth is, none of those things guarantee fulfillment. None of them guarantee meaning. None of them guarantee that you will wake up in the morning feeling like your life matters, because a job is not a purpose, a salary is not a legacy, and expectations are not identity. Impact, however, is different. Impact is the echo of your existence. It is the ripple that keeps moving long after your effort has ended. It is the unseen, often uncelebrated, but deeply felt influence you have on others. Impact outlives achievement. Achievement may decorate your resume, but impact decorates the hearts of the people you touch. Achievement may earn applause, but applause fades the moment the room empties. Impact outlives applause because it is carried by others long after the clapping stops. And impact outlives you not because your name is remembered, but because your contribution continues in the lives you shaped. And that is far more powerful than any recognition the world can offer. When you ask, what impact do I want to create? You are making a choice to step out of the shadow of self-interest and into the light of purpose. You shift from success to significance. Success ends with you. Significance begins with you, but continues beyond you. Success asks, how far can I go? Significance asks, how far can I help others go? And the moment you make that shift, your life gains a depth that ambition alone cannot provide. There is a profound transformation that happens when you stop asking, what do I get? And start asking, what do I give? Because giving is not just an act. It's an identity. It changes the way you think, the way you work, the way you live. It turns your life from a race into a contribution, from a competition into a mission, from a checklist into a legacy. And the remarkable thing about people who pursue impact is that they rarely struggle with motivation. People assume that those who do meaningful work must be incredibly disciplined, endlessly energetic, or naturally driven. But the truth is simpler. They're fueled by meaning. Meaning creates its own momentum. When something matters deeply to you, you don't have to force yourself to show up. You feel pulled toward it. When you know why your work matters, you unlock a level of consistency that motivation cannot match. Motivation comes and goes. Inspiration rises and falls. But meaning stays. It becomes the quiet engine that keeps you moving forward even when circumstances are difficult, even when progress is slow, even when no one else sees the effort you're putting in. People who pursue impact don't wake up thinking, I have to do this. They wake up thinking, it matters that I do this. That shift changes everything. It turns obligation into devotion. It turns effort into fulfillment. It turns work into purpose. And purpose is the most sustainable fuel a human being can have. When you think about the impact you want to create, you begin to see yourself not as someone who is trying to make it through life, but as someone who is trying to make life better for yourself, for others, or for the world. That impact doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to be global. It doesn't have to be newsworthy. The greatest impact is often quiet. A teacher who helps a child believe in their potential. A parent who teaches values that shape a generation. A friend who shows up when others disappear. A leader who inspires people to see themselves differently. A creator whose work touches one heart at the right moment. Impact is not measured in numbers. It is measured in meaning. And every single person has the ability to create impact. The question is not whether you can. The question is whether you choose to. Impact starts with intention. It begins with the decision to use whatever you have, your skills, your words, your kindness, your experiences, your perspective, to make something better than you found it. You don't need power to create impact. You need purpose. You don't need permission to create impact. You need willingness. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need the first step. When you decide to create impact, you become aware of the opportunities around you that you once overlooked. You start noticing moments where your presence can make a difference. You start recognizing that your story, your struggles, your strengths, they are not random. They are tools. Tools that can help someone else. Tools that can contribute to something greater. Tools that can shape the kind of world you want to live in. And with every act of impact, something profound happens inside you. You grow in resilience because you're working for something bigger than your own comfort. You grow in courage because making impact usually requires stepping outside your familiar limits. You grow in clarity because purpose sharpens your direction. And you grow in fulfillment because significance brings a kind of joy that success alone cannot give. Impact is the legacy of a life lived intentionally. It is the evidence that you didn't just exist, you contributed. You didn't just take, you gave. You didn't just pass through life, you shaped it. And whether your impact touches millions or only a few, the truth remains the same. A life that creates impact is a life well lived. When you ask yourself the question, what am I willing to commit to daily? You touch the one part of purpose that most people never reach. Purpose is exciting. It feels inspiring, energizing, almost electric. Everyone loves the idea of purpose. Everyone loves the idea of becoming the best version of themselves. Everyone loves the idea of breakthroughs, transformations, and new beginnings. But commitment. Commitment is something else entirely. Commitment is uncomfortable. It demands routine, repetition, and resilience. And that is exactly where most people stop. Not because they lack desire, but because they underestimate what daily discipline really requires. Clarity without commitment is just a dream. You can know exactly what you want. You can articulate your purpose beautifully. You can write it down, visualize it, talk about it, and imagine it. But without consistent action, it remains only a thought. And thoughts without action eventually turn into regret. So many people look back years later and realize they weren't held back by a lack of ambition. They were held back by a lack of daily commitment. Dreams are light. Action is heavy. But it is the heavy work that builds the life you imagine. This question, what am I willing to do every single day, even on the days I don't feel like it, is not a small question. It is a soul-level question because it strips away the fantasy and reveals the truth. Anyone can act when they are inspired. Anyone can work when they feel motivated. Anyone can be disciplined when things are going well. But the life you want is built in the moments when you don't feel like doing anything. Your future is shaped not by your feelings, but by your follow-through. When you ask what you are willing to commit to daily, you begin to recognize that the extraordinary is always built on the ordinary. It's the small actions repeated consistently that create results so big that people later call them breakthroughs. But breakthroughs are rarely sudden. They are the final visible moment of thousands of invisible efforts. The world sees the transformation, but not the daily commitment that made it possible. The reason commitment feels uncomfortable is because it asks you to choose structure over impulse. It asks you to show up not as you are in the moment, but as the person you are becoming. It demands you work beyond your emotions, beyond your excuses, beyond your comfort zone. And that is hard, but that is also how you grow. Commitment doesn't just build habits, it builds identity. It slowly shapes you into someone who can trust themselves, rely on themselves, and lead themselves. What am I willing to do every day is not just a question of productivity. It is a question of character. It forces you to confront your tendencies. It makes you aware of the gap between your intentions and your behaviors. It brings honesty to your priorities. Anyone can want something, but only those who commit daily will receive it. This question challenges you to decide whether your dreams are preferences or priorities. Preferences are optional. Priorities are non-negotiable. It is true that purpose isn't found in big leaps. Big leaps are dramatic, impressive, and exciting, but they are rare. Most of life is not lived in leaps, it's lived in steps. Small daily steps. Quiet, often unnoticed steps, the kind of steps no one applauds, no one celebrates, and no one sees. But these are the steps that change everything. The small actions you repeat every day slowly become the architecture of a life that looks extraordinary from the outside. And the most beautiful thing about daily commitment is how it compounds. At first, it feels like nothing is happening. You take a small step and the results seem invisible. You repeat it the next day and still nothing. And maybe the next week, the next month, or even the next year, you feel like you're walking toward a horizon that keeps moving away from you. But what you don't see is the quiet compounding happening beneath the surface. Every day you commit, you are building strength, discipline, clarity, and momentum. Every day you commit, you are moving closer even if the progress is invisible. And then suddenly one day everything clicks, the results appear, the transformation becomes visible, the future you've been building toward finally arrives. And it feels almost magical, yet it was not magic. It was consistency. Your consistency is the contract you sign with your future. It is the proof that you are not waiting for luck, not relying on motivation, not depending on inspiration. You are building your future with your own hands, one day at a time. Your consistency tells your future, you can trust me, I will show up, I will do the work, I will keep going. And when you keep your side of that contract, the future keeps its side too. It gives you growth. It gives you strength. It gives you opportunities you once thought were out of reach. It gives you confidence rooted not in talent, but in effort. There is a moment in every journey where discipline feels like sacrifice. You give up comfort, you give up distraction, you give up the easier path. But over time, what once felt like sacrifice begins to feel like alignment. You no longer force yourself to commit, you feel drawn to it. Because commitment becomes familiar, it becomes part of who you are. And when commitment becomes part of your identity, success stops being a possibility and starts becoming a direction. Daily commitment teaches you patience. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you humility. It teaches you that progress is rarely loud, but it is always real. It teaches you that you don't need to do everything today. You just need to do something today. Something that moves you forward. Something that honors your purpose. Something that signals to yourself that you are choosing growth over comfort, direction over distraction, and your future over your present feelings. Asking yourself what you're willing to commit to every day is not merely about discipline. It's about transformation, because the version of you that will achieve the life you imagine will not appear suddenly. That version of you is built through daily commitments. It is built through choosing consistency over convenience. It is built through small steps that may feel insignificant in the moment, but become life-changing over time. And the truth is, your future self is depending on the choices you make today. Every day you commit, you move closer to that future. Every day you avoid the work, you move further away. That is the power and the responsibility held in this single question: what am I willing to commit to daily? Most people spend their entire lives avoiding the very questions that could change everything for them. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunity, but because honest clarity requires courage, and courage is uncomfortable. The truth is, asking deep questions towards the version of ourselves we are familiar with. It forces us to confront our limitations, our excuses, and the stories we've repeated for so long that we've started believing them. So people avoid these questions not out of laziness, but out of fear that the answers might demand responsibility, change, or effort. And because they avoid them, they wake up year after year in the same place, living the same patterns, repeating the same habits that quietly shape a life they never consciously designed. Avoiding these questions is easy because the world constantly gives us distractions to hide inside. You can fill your entire day with notifications, chores, entertainment, meaningless tasks, and background noise. You can drown your purpose in the comfort of routine. Society rewards business far more than it rewards reflection. It's far easier to stay occupied than to stay honest. When someone asks themselves, what do I really want? They challenge the expectations that have been placed on them since childhood. When someone asks, what am I afraid to admit? They risk discovering a truth that could shatter their current identity. And when someone asks, what am I willing to commit to daily? They realize that success has nothing to do with dreams and everything to do with discipline. These questions force us to confront the gap between who we are and who we want to be, and that gap is often uncomfortable to look at. The avoidance begins early. As children, we ask questions naturally. We're curious. We want to understand. But as we grow older, we're told to fit in, to stop asking why, to follow the safe and predictable path. That conditioning teaches us to fear introspection. We learn to silence our own voice so we can meet the expectations of others. We work jobs we dislike because they are stable. We stay in routines that drain us because they are familiar. And slowly, the habit of not asking questions becomes the habit of not evolving. People don't avoid these questions because they don't know how to reflect. They avoid them because reflection threatens the structure of their comfort zone. Comfort is the trap that keeps millions stuck. It gives us the illusion of safety while silently stealing growth. If you ask yourself, what do I really want? You might have to admit that the job you're doing is not aligned with your future. If you ask, what am I afraid to pursue? You might have to face the fear of failing or being judged. And if you ask, what am I willing to commit to daily? You might have to remove the excuses that have protected your ego. The mind prefers a predictable unhappiness over an unpredictable possibility. That is the core of human behavior. We don't choose the best option, we choose the most familiar one. These questions disrupt familiarity. They shake the system. They demand evolution. That's why people avoid them. Another reason most people avoid these questions is because they expose the difference between desire and dedication. Everyone desires success. Everyone wants freedom, wealth, health, and happiness. But very few people want the responsibility that comes with those outcomes. Asking, what am I willing to commit to daily, strips away fantasy. It forces you to see that every dream has a price, and the price is consistency long after the excitement disappears. Most people would rather believe in luck than in discipline. They would rather hope for a breakthrough than build one. So they avoid the question because the answer reveals whether they truly want success or just like the idea of it. These questions also confront our deepest fears: fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being good enough. When someone asks themselves, what am I afraid to admit? They open the door to vulnerability. That vulnerability is powerful but scary. It exposes the illusions we hide behind. It shows us the truth about our habits, our priorities, and our choices. Most people prefer to protect their ego instead of pursuing their potential. It's safer to pretend we don't know what we want than to admit we want something we haven't been brave enough to pursue. Avoidance feels protective, but it becomes a cage. And every year spent inside that cage strengthens the bars. The problem with avoiding these questions is that life does not pause just because we do. Time keeps moving. Opportunities keep passing. Dreams become heavier when ignored. A person can avoid reflection for years until the weight of an unfulfilled life becomes impossible to ignore. They wake up one day wondering how they ended up where they never intended to be. But the truth is, their life didn't suddenly fall apart. It drifted. Drifting happens when you stop asking questions. Drifting happens when you stop challenging your direction. The people who grow, the people who rise, the people who transform all have one thing in common: they ask difficult questions even when the answers scare them. Most people overestimate the pain of change and underestimate the pain of staying the same. Asking these questions can feel heavy for a moment, but avoiding them becomes heavy for a lifetime. The resistance people feel isn't because the questions are complicated, it's because the answers demand action. They demand that you take ownership of your life. Ownership is uncomfortable because it leaves no one else to blame. But ownership is also empowering because it gives you the ability to rewrite your future at any moment. When you ask these questions honestly, you regain control of your direction. There is a moment in every person's journey when they must decide whether they will keep living unintentionally or start living deliberately. That moment begins with a question. Questions are the doorway to clarity. Clarity is the doorway to purpose. Purpose is the doorway to discipline. And discipline is the doorway to freedom. People think freedom means doing whatever you want, but real freedom means being who you're meant to be. You cannot reach that level of freedom without confronting yourself. You cannot design a meaningful future without understanding your present reality. And you cannot step into your full potential while running from your internal truth. The reason these questions are powerful is because they simplify everything. They eliminate noise. They remove distractions. They reveal what truly matters. The moment you ask, what do I really want? Your priorities shift. The moment you ask, what am I afraid to admit? You release the fears that have controlled you. And the moment you ask, what am I willing to commit to daily? You begin building a life where your results are no longer accidental. They are intentional. People stay stuck because they want transformation without disruption, clarity without effort, purpose without honesty, and progress without consistency. But life doesn't work that way. Transformation is earned through truth. Clarity is earned through reflection. Freedom is earned through discipline. Those who dare to ask these questions separate themselves from the crowd. They live with direction, not confusion. With purpose, not pressure. With momentum, not stagnation. The only difference between someone stuck and someone rising is the courage to face these questions and act on the answers. The moment you stop avoiding them is the moment your life begins to change from reactive to proactive, from accidental to intentional, from stuck to unstoppable. Answering these questions is not just an exercise in reflection, it is an awakening. It is the moment when your life stops drifting and begins aligning. Most people wander through life with a quiet sense that something is missing without ever identifying what that something actually is. They feel the pull of a deeper purpose, but remain disconnected from it because they've never paused long enough to listen. When you finally sit with the questions that matter, what do I really want? What am I afraid to admit? What am I willing to commit to daily? You create space for truth to rise to the surface. And truth is powerful. It cuts through noise, dissolves illusions, and pulls your life into alignment with who you were meant to be. When you answer these questions honestly, you begin to see the parts of your life that no longer belong. You notice the distractions masquerading as obligations, the habits pretending to be harmless, the people you've outgrown, and the routines that have kept you small. Clarity has a way of shining a light on everything that doesn't align with your purpose. Suddenly, the choices you make begin to shift. You no longer chase what's popular, you chase what's personal. You stop living for the expectations of others, you start living from the truth within you. And that shift, subtle at first, becomes the foundation of an entirely different life. Purpose is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in small, conscious decisions that align with your deepest values. When you ask yourself what you truly want, you stop settling for what is convenient. You stop compromising your potential for comfort. You begin choosing the things that nourish you instead of the things that numb you. You realize that your energy is precious, your time is limited, and your life is too valuable to be spent on pursuits that don't move you forward. Each honest answer pulls you closer to a life that feels meaningful rather than mechanical. Answering these questions also reconnects you with your inner compass, the part of you that always knows the way but often gets drowned by external noise. Most people lose their direction not because they lack ambition, but because they become overpowered by the opinions and expectations around them. When you take the time to ask yourself what you want and why, you reclaim ownership of your choices. You start acting from intention rather than reaction. You stop living by default and begin living by design. This internal alignment creates a level of confidence that does not need validation because it comes from within. One of the most transformative parts of this process is the courage that grows through honest answers. When you admit what you're afraid of, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of change, you strip those fears of their power. Most fears thrive in silence. They control you from the shadows. But the moment you speak them, the moment you acknowledge them, they lose their grip. You begin to understand that fear is not the barrier, avoidance is. When you face your fears head on, you build a stronger, braver, more resilient version of yourself. And that version is the one capable of living a purposeful, fulfilling life. Purpose isn't found in avoiding discomfort. It is found in walking through it. That's why the third question, what am I willing to commit to daily, is so important. This question brings your purpose out of the clouds and into the real world. Dreams become reality only when they are tied to daily habits. Commitments turn vision into progress. When you define what you are willing to do every single day, you begin building a life where consistency replaces luck, discipline replaces wishful thinking, and momentum replaces stagnation. The small actions you repeat daily become the architecture of a meaningful life. Answering these questions realigns your life by revealing what actually matters to you. It shows you what deserves your time and what doesn't. It helps you separate long-term fulfillment from short-term temptation. And in a world full of distractions, that kind of clarity is priceless. You start noticing the things that drain you, the conversations that weaken you, the habits that slow you down. And instead of tolerating them, you begin adjusting, refining, releasing. This process of alignment is not about adding more to your life. It's about removing what no longer belongs. When you let go of what is misaligned, what is meant for you finally has room to grow. There is also a quiet empowerment that emerges when you answer these questions truthfully. You realize that your future is not a matter of chance. It's a matter of choice. You see that progress is not random. It is intentional. A purposeful life is not something you stumble into. It is something you build with clarity, courage, and commitment. Each answer you give removes another layer of confusion. Each moment of honesty strengthens your direction. Each daily commitment compounds quietly until one day you look back and realize that everything has changed, not because of one big moment, but because of 1,000 small ones. Another powerful shift happens when you understand that purpose is deeply connected to alignment, not achievement. Many people chase accomplishments thinking they will bring fulfillment, only to realize they were climbing the wrong ladder. When you answer these fundamental questions, your goals begin to change. They shift from external rewards to internal resonance. You stop pursuing success that impresses others and start pursuing success that expresses who you really are. This is the beginning of true fulfillment because your life starts reflecting your authentic identity rather than your inherited identity. Answering these questions also opens the door to healthier relationships, both with others and with yourself. When you gain clarity about what you want and what you're committed to, you naturally attract people who support that path. You stop tolerating relationships that drain you. You start seeking those that elevate you. You become more intentional with your boundaries and more aware of your worth. Purpose strengthens self-respect, and self-respect strengthens the way you move through the world. Most importantly, answering these questions places you back in alignment with the future you're meant to create. Life becomes less about rushing and more about advancing, less about reacting and more about choosing, less about surviving and more about becoming. Your days start to reflect your values. Your decisions start to reflect your growth. And slowly, alignment turns into fulfillment. Fulfillment turns into momentum. And momentum turns into a life that feels deeply yours. When you choose to ask these questions, and more importantly, to answer them with honesty, you realign your life with your potential. You rediscover the parts of yourself you abandoned, the dreams you postponed, the confidence you misplaced, and the strength you forgot you had. You begin living with direction, intention, and meaning. And that is how a life transforms. Not through chance, not through luck, but through clarity, courage, and the willingness to commit to the version of yourself you're becoming. Clarity is the invisible force behind every meaningful decision you will ever make. It is the difference between movement and progress, between activity and purpose, between living accidentally and living intentionally. Without clarity, life becomes a series of guesses. Reacting instead of choosing, drifting instead of directing, surviving instead of building. Clarity is not just knowing what you want. It is understanding why you want it, what it requires, what it costs, and who you must become to earn it. It is the foundation because nothing meaningful can be built on uncertainty. A powerful life, a purposeful life, a fulfilled life, they all begin with the courage to see things as they truly are and not as we wish them to be. When clarity is missing, every decision becomes heavier. You hesitate, you doubt yourself. You second guess every step because you don't know where the step is leading. You become overwhelmed, not because life is complicated,